Hello world, this is Lisa Friedrichsen, your friendly professor from Johnson County Community College, and this screencast is to give you examples of JavaScript that you could put in your final JavaScript game. So here's my web page. I've added a little H1 content in my header section. I've added a couple paragraphs in my footer section, and in my style sheet, I've also added a background color of white to the body, light gray to the outer wrapper. On my media queries, when I get down to tablet size, I'm doing a little bit darker gray. And when I get down to phone size, I'm doing an even darker gray. And here's how that web page responds right now. At full size, I'm using 90% of the screen with a very light gray background. And as I get down to tablet size, I'm using the full width, 100%, a little bit darker gray. And when I get down to phone size, I'm going a little bit darker gray, just to make sure that my media queries are working as intended. So that's really all I'm requiring, is that you just acknowledge that all web pages need to be responsive and put in some reasonable, meaningful styles as your viewport changes sizes, just to keep responsive web design principles in mind. But nothing more than this is really required here, because after all, the class is on JavaScript. So let's get our JavaScript going. So we're going to be in the main section, and the thing that's going to be creative on your end is deciding what kinds of questions do you want to ask and how do you want to organize them. So I'm just going to give you one example using radio buttons. So your first question might be, what is JavaScript? So your first list item could be input type equals radio, and that would be a scripting language used with HTML and CSS. That would be the correct answer. The second input radio box might have an incorrect answer, the same as Java. And let's give it one more incorrect answer. Input type equals radio, a subset of Java. Let's see how that looks on our web page. Save, refresh. So here's our first question. This is the first thing that you need to do, is simply code up your HTML without worrying about JavaScript. So I've got three choices, 1, 2, or 3. To make the bouncing ball in input type equals radio mutually exclusive, you have to give these input radio boxes the same name. You're referring to the field name, and I'm going to call the name Q1. This is for question 1. You can give that name property anything that makes sense to you. But watch what happens when I give these radio buttons the same name. Refresh. Now the bouncing ball is working as intended. So now I've got my HTML done correctly. I want this to interact with the user using JavaScript. So then I might add something like this, a button, and with some text, reveal the correct answer. Let's see how that looks on my, if 1 is chosen and I click reveal the correct answer, I want a congratulatory message sent to the user. If I click options 2 or 3 and click reveal the correct answer, I want a message sent to the user that your answer was incorrect. Now we have our HTML coded up for our first question, and we're ready to write our JavaScript. Sometimes for me, it's easiest to write the JavaScript from inside to out. We have to decide what we want it to do. And what I want it to do is to do in a window alert, you have selected the correct answer. Or I might want it to say Java and JavaScript are separate languages. So just getting those statements written correctly with window.alert and my text in quotation marks in parentheses and ending my statement with a semicolon is one piece of this puzzle. So let me refresh my page, and I'm seeing that my JavaScript is correctly running. I've selected the correct answer, and Java and JavaScript are separate languages. I've got my JavaScript running. It has nothing to do with these buttons, and it has nothing to do with clicking the reveal the correct answer button. So let's go back to my HTML, and let's put an ID of A1 on this first input box. So that's going to be answer 1. I'm also going to put an ID of B1 on my first button. Now the ID values can be whatever you want them to be. They just have to be sensical. But the reason I'm going to ID this option button and ID this button is because I want my JavaScript to talk to those two things. And so if I want my JavaScript to specifically talk to an element on the web page, I generally have to give it an ID. So let's go back to my game JavaScript, In chapter 3, you're going to learn about if-then-else statements, and they look something like this. If, and then in parentheses, you put your test. And the test is going to be if document.getElement by ID A1 is checked. And that's the statement. If that's true, if A1, if this input box, if this little radio button is checked, then I want this alert to happen. So I'm going to say if that's checked, if that's true, I want to window alert, else. And the else syntax is a little odd for JavaScript in my opinion, that the if statements go inside of curly braces. So sometimes we like to indent that. And by the way, you can indent your JavaScript for readability just like you do your HTML. But here's how that would look. If this is true, if A1 is checked, then give this window alert, else give that window alert. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to refresh my page. I'm getting you have selected the correct answer, okay, and I'm not getting the second alert. So I've already improved this JavaScript to only respond with the correct answer. Let's test for 2. I'm going to choose the second radio button, refresh. Java and JavaScript are separate languages. I'll test for 3, refresh. Java and JavaScript are separate languages. So only if this evaluates true am I going to get the first part of this answer. Now, for my next task, I want to connect this JavaScript and not run it when I refresh my page, but rather when I click this button. To do that, it's best to surround the entire block with a function name that can be called from an event listener. So my function name might be question1. Function statements are surrounded in curly braces. So I've got another set of curly braces to add in here. And I'm going to indent my if-then-else statement. I've got a function called question1, and left and right parentheses always follow our function names, even if we don't have to feed it any arguments, which we don't in this case. So function question1 runs this. So now if I refresh my page, see I'm not getting any alerts because I'm not running function question1. But how can I run function question1? Well, that's where document get element by ID B1. B1 is this button. B1 is this button. Comes into play. And I'm going to listen for an event. I'm going to do an add event listener, and I'm going to listen for the click event, and I'm going to run the question1 function. And when we use function names and event listeners, we do not include the left and right parenthesis. That's just when they're being defined. And I'm going to say false here. That has to do with the order in which your JavaScript is run. Remember that my event has to be in quotation marks. And refresh, reveal the correct answer, and there we go. I've got my first question for my JavaScript game done.